It's time for the T.O. Hayes Show. He's the pastor that holds nothing back. He lifts you up and helps keep you grounded when you need it. Here to deliver some insight on life's everyday topics while bringing you the Word of God and some incredible gospel music. It's your pastor, Dorrance Orlando Hayes.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Power Talk. Today, we're going to have a very special guest with us. He's a great man of God. I thank God for our relationship, the connection, the kingdom connection that has been made. His name is Dr. Dorrance Kennedy. He's a professor, a licensed clinical social worker, a motivational speaker, and an ordained minister, a husband, a father, and the founder of Empower Your Purpose. He's penned an awesome book entitled The Wisdom from My Father's Porch. So let's welcome him to Power Talk. Well, hello, my brother. How are you on this day?
Dr. Hayes, great to be with you on this Martin Luther King Day.
Yes, it is. What an awesome day. Here we are on Martin Luther King Day. And man, I tell you, your book is such a timely message, a timely moment to share on this episode today. So I'm going to say, first of all, we welcome you again to Power Talk. And I'm just going to ask you some questions because, first of all, let me say this. You are the expert of this book.
Amen.
And it's a great book. And matter of fact, you actually gave a diagnosis of me. We're going to talk about that later on as we get further in the conversation. But, let me say this. Let's start with this question. In the book, of course, you speak about the frequently asked questions, and there are 5 of them listed. Is there any one of them that's asked more frequently?
Well, thank you again once, Dr. Hayes. So I have a copy of my book right here. So on the back of the text, I have a list of certain questions like what's the connection between spirituality and manhood? What can make Black men wise leaders? How can young Black men build strong character? How can young Black men support their families? And how can young Black men handle trouble? So I think for this topic, maybe the most appropriate start, all the questions are very relevant, but I think how to build strong character in our young Black men probably would be the best starting point for us to jump into, because obviously the child is the father to the man. So,
Yes.
that childhood foundation has to be laid. Those morals and values have to be implemented in order for our young Black men to grow up and be what God called them to be.
Oh, I love that. As you said, starting with character of our young Black men and having that modeled behavior of the parent, the father, the son, which brings me to the point here. First of all, I love the title. So as I've read the book and I begin to see some background of the inspiration of the title. So what really inspired you to title your book, The Wisdom of My Father? Yeah.
Well, I actually have an older brother that lives in Texas. He's 3 years older than I am. And we've been talking about me writing a book for years. So I was throwing out title ideas and he was throwing out ideas, and we were kind of going back and forth. And then he actually came up with the title, Wisdom from My Father's Porch. So when he said it, it's kind of like sometimes I go to the store and shop for suits, and I get a suit, and then I'll ask the salesman, man, you got to hook me up with the tie and the shirt. And they'll lay down this tie and that shirt, and it's like, nah, that's not it. And then it's like, it's getting closer. And then finally he lays something down. It's like, boom, that's it. So when he said that title, I liked it immediately, and everybody I've talked to really likes that title of the book.
Wow, thank you. Yes, it's an awesome title, The Wisdom from My Father's Porch. And it came about with a conversation with your brother. But, also, first of all, thank God you're a father, you have a son. And your book kind of made reference to some inspirations from the book as well, was from your father. You lost your father by cancer. You've also lost some colleagues, Black male friends, and also, as you mentioned, raising your son. So all those persons in your life also played another impact in this title. So I want to thank you for that because it's a great, great title. So another question though, but is it written especially or just specifically for young Black men?
It's written for young Black men and all those who love and are connected to them. So it's written for parents and pastors and leaders in the church and teachers and educators and the women that love young Black men. So this can be for mothers and aunts. So even though I targeted young Black men, it's really directed towards everyone. Because I think everyone, no matter what your age or gender is, can get something out of the book.
Most definitely. But I think also, though, it helps those that have some insight, as you mentioned, about character of young Black men, what we go through, what we've experienced, and how we feel about it. So I think your book definitely clarifies that very well. So let's say this. In the content of the text of your book, I'm about to call it the textbook, because so you're also a professor. Before I get ahead of yourself, you are a professor. You're also a clinical counselor. So let's talk about that a little bit before I get more into the book. Go ahead.
Yes, well, I'm a graduate of Hampton University, historically Black college in Virginia. I then got a Master of Social Work at Southern University, Master of Social Work down in New Orleans. When I was called to the ministry, I became a student at the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary in New Orleans. Then when I got engaged and eventually married my college classmate from Hampton University, she's from St. Louis. So I moved from St. Louis and continued my theological degree at Covenant Theological Seminary in St. Louis. And then we lived in there in Missouri for a couple of years. And then when we decided to move to North Carolina, I started teaching there, professor of social work, and I eventually got a doctorate of education at Fayetteville State University, where I currently teach at.
Wow, you are very well learned, my brother. You have an awesome resume of skills and information. And I'm going to kind of fast forward right quick because you just made a good segue here. In the book, you talk about dressing well. And I like how you begin to give the analogy of going to a suit store and laying down the suit, the tie, the shirt, and make sure it's the right fit. But you said in your book, there are a few things more impressive than an African-American man who is, number one, educated, well-spoken, and well-dressed. I like that. You know, I'm a former military Air Force man, and I served 21 years and 7 months. And, you know, I've been retired, 20 years, and I still have the mentality of being dressed in my guidelines, regulations, you know, certain weight, you know, haircut, you know, trim. But I think that's a good thing, as you said, that's impressive for the African-American male to, you know, be well-dressed, be well-educated, seek to learn knowledge and gain wisdom, be well-spoken as you are. But I love what you said. Oh, this is MLK weekend. So you've highlighted a lot of great things about Dr. Martin Luther King. What was it about Dr. Martin Luther King, may I ask, that had an impact in your life?
Well, if we're talking about dress, you know, if you see pictures of Dr. King was always sharp, always well-groomed. So he was a very well-dressed man. He's probably the greatest speaker in terms of his eloquence that I've ever heard. And just, you know, he was like a walking encyclopedia in terms of his knowledge. And I think, you know, Dr. King was just tremendous for his time. And I think as African Americans, there was so much pride with Dr. King because the fact that he had an earned PhD back in the 50s. So when Black folks called him Dr. King, I mean, yes, that meant something. Of course, nowadays in the church, everybody's a doctor. But I mean, he was an earned PhD, Boston University. And then, you know, his courage, his fearlessness, the moral level of his leadership, So I think in terms of African Americans, he is the greatest leader of all time in terms of his impact, his morality, his eloquence, his knowledge base. And he is deeply missed today in our community with all the things that are going on right now.
Oh, most definitely, man. That's excellent. I love how you said that. I want to say this as well. In your book, you said that Martin Luther King was transformed at Morehouse College. Yeah, yes.
Because he sat under Dr. Benjamin Mays, who was another giant that a lot of people don't know about. So even though Dr. King, grew up in a preacher's household and he was the grandson of a preacher as well, there was some time when Dr. King struggled with his faith. He did not want to enter the ministry. He thought some ideas of the Bible were outdated. But when he got under the influence of Dr. Benjamin Mays, who he called his intellectual father, he said that Dr. Mays was the role model of the minister that he would like to be. And he always referred to him as his intellectual father. And when Martin Luther King first came into public leadership, he was only 26 years old. And I read that he used Benjamin Mays' persona to try to project himself to be older and more experienced than what he was when he first became a public figure.
Oh, wow, man. You know what? I love this information you are sharing. This is a great moment. This is a God moment. Thank you so much for sharing that. So let's talk more insight about the book as well. The content of the book addresses 13 areas of life. I'm going to name them: spirituality, family, culture. These three leads the way as far as the content of the book. And then it's followed by trouble, time, character, mentality, knowledge, relationships, community, appearance, money, and career, health, and well-being. What directed your mind to take these areas of life to address in your book?
Well, I just thought those areas that are listed, are pretty comprehensive in terms of what young men and just people in general are dealing with, or what they need to focus on to be successful. So, we all have to pay attention to our health and our relationships with our family, our friends, our education. So those topics just came to me kind of spontaneously. I just got on the computer and started typing, and these topics were what was put in my spirit in terms of what we needed to focus on in the book.
Awesome. I love that. As you said, these things, as a writer, as an author here, what inspires you? The word of God was inspired. The men of God wrote the God that were inspired by the inspiration of God. So as a writer here, you begin to bring these elements of life together to share them in your story. And again, since we're here, we're talking a lot about MLK, because your book addresses a lot about MLK. So I want to pick some things about that. So be there. You had here that respect for elders. Said, we must not forget the bridges that brought us over. But Dr. King struggled to end segregation. And today, a lot of people are doing what they're doing, the marching for him, or for this day, people coming together from all cultures. So I think seeing that this is one of the things that Dr. King stood for, wanting to see end segregation. Let's talk a little bit about that from your perspective.
Yeah, because I remember when I was reading the scripture, how, of course, Moses led the children of Israel across the Red Sea. And then once his assignment was up, Joshua was chosen by God to be his successor, and how Joshua led the people across the river Canaan, or the river Jordan, into the promised land. And the Bible says that once he got that done, that he was commanded to take 12 stones and make a monument so that the people and generations that came after him would know how the Lord brought us over.
Yeah.
And I think especially today and in this time, it's very important for us as African Americans to still stay focused on how we made it over. Because as a college professor a couple of years ago, I would ask my predominantly African-American students basic information about President Barack Obama. Where was he born and where did he go to college at and where's his parents from? And they could not tell me basic information about President Barack Obama. And one interesting thing in our community right now, my mother just turned 81 a couple days ago. And in the near future, I mean, we still have elders in the African-American community that lived through Jim Crow and lived through segregation. But the time is coming in the next 20 to 30 years where those Black folks that went through segregation would have passed away. So we still have a lot of living history amongst us. But even, you know, if you look at the news, the people that worked with Dr. King and marched with Dr. King, some of those people are passing away. So it's very important that we talk to our elders while they yet live.
Oh, yeah.
Because if I talk to my mother right now, she can tell me stories of having to read the Constitution before she was able to vote. She can tell me stories of when she took my brother, for example, to the pediatrician. There were certain days that the pediatrician saw the Black children. This is firsthand information that my mother can share with me that I don't have to go to a book to get. So I really think those of us that are younger really need to partake of the knowledge that our elders have to teach us, because they were able to change the world without all the education and technology that we have today. And even you as a pastor, you know, a lot of our churches were built on the backs of those Black people that were only able to give a nickel or a dime or a quarter for offering on Sunday morning. And we could never have these so-called mega churches that we have today without the civil rights movement that allowed Black people to make money and become middle class. So it's very dangerous. We cannot forget the bridges that brought us over.
Wow, man, that is awesome right there. Speaking about our elders, their age and respect, your mother, how she's a present wealth of information. And as you said, we have these men, persons who were with Dr. King who become of age now, and some of them may be still here, but we have these men we can gain from their wisdom, back to wisdom from my father's porch. These are present persons that we can have conversation with. My father-in-law is 90 years old. And when you sit down with an older person, they bring up all the experience that they've encountered in life. And I had a young pastor, he was a young pastor, I think he was like 32 years old. He said, Pastor Hayes, when I sit in the presence of an older person, he said, I just sit and listen. Because sitting and listening, as you just shared, there's so much that they can bring to us, a lived experience that they had in their lives. And you mentioned about in the college classroom, some of these young and African-American students may not be aware of some of the history, even about our first African-American president, former President Barack Obama. Information is so important and knowledge is very important, which brings me to another point you brought about in your text. I keep saying textbook, your class book. Culture. You spoke about we do not cherish our institutions that we have that are culturally in our society today. And you mentioned specifically the Lorraine Motel. Talk about that.
Yes, I referred to the Lorraine Motel, but I also remember referring to in the book, I took a trip to Washington, D.C., and Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black History Month, he's one of my heroes. And I specifically made sure that I visited his home in Washington, D.C. And a couple of years ago, nobody could enter the home because the home was in disrepair. And that's another thing I think we need to work on in our community. We have treasures, we have landmarks that are historic in our community. And for some reason, sometimes we don't make sure that, you know, they are in good condition. Sometimes we allow them to fall apart, and then the government or somebody else has to come in to refurbish those communities. I remember taking a trip down to Alabama, And I went down to Alabama, and I saw, I believe I was in Birmingham or someplace like that. And I saw the church of the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, who was another civil rights legend. And my friend and I, who was also a minister, we were shocked at the condition of the neighborhood surrounding, I believe it was Bethel Baptist Church. And we were shocked at the dilapidated condition of the houses around that historic church. And what I said to my buddy was that, you know, we have enough wealth in the Black community that we can make sure that certain things that are of historic nature remain in good condition. Because I heard before they refurbished the Lorraine Hotel, you know, it was getting overrun by drug traffic and things like that before they finally decided to refurbish it. So I just think we have to have more pride. I think we have more wealth. We have enough wealth in the Black community that we can make sure that our historical landmarks remain in good condition.
I love that. You know, community is so important. And our communities that are around us that we live in, we want to make sure that we invest in them. And as you mentioned about historical landmarks that may be there, that they are refurbished, restored. I think that's so important that we keep our communities to be a beacon of light. When people come into our cities and drive in a different state and they want to go to certain landmarks just to see, because there are places. I want to go to the African American Culture Museum in Washington. I haven't been there yet. That's one of the places I want to go because I understand there's a lot of history there, a lot of culture. But I want to say this too about you. You stood in the pulpit of Atlanta's Ebenezer Baptist Church. How did that feel?
That, I mean, as a preacher and as a Black preacher, I mean, that is an awesome experience. I stood in the pulpit at Ebenezer. Also, when I went to Harlem, I stood in the pulpit of Abyssinian Baptist Church, which was the church of Adam Clayton Powell Jr. and Sr. I also visited, I went down to Montgomery and visited Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. So, you know, and I just think, especially in the ministry right now, we have to have, as ministers and as men of God, I think we have to have historical context, because there was a time when in the Black community, the pastor not only gave spiritual messages, but he gave messages of community and economic development, political empowerment. And I think with what's going on in our culture right now, with this move to restrict and take away the right to vote, here in North Carolina, I know that there was some historically Black colleges in the last couple of weeks that have received death threats. I'm sorry, not death threats, bomb threats in the last several days. So there are just some troubling trends that are going on. And I just think the man of God should be able to enlighten the congregation about what is happening and give wise counsel from the word of God in terms of how we should address these things.
Oh, I love that. You know, when we come to the church and our house of God and as pastors and ministers and elders and preachers, we're responsible for the information we share. And we need to talk about life, you know, history, historical events, what people went through, gone through, and enlighten their understanding. As you said, we should find ourselves visiting historical sites, places of history. I was recently in Mississippi, and my wife and I, my daughters and grandkids, took a trip to the museum at the African American Culture Museum in Mississippi. We have opportunity to go there and see the history. Also, I drove it to Montgomery as well, to their historical African American museum, and just to see those displays and the writings on the names of the slaves and all. I mean, this is really this is reality, and this is where we come from, what people have gone through and been through, and I think it's so relatable. As you mentioned about trouble here, troubled times and experience about what's happening with North Carolina with those bomb threats. This is the 21st century, and we're still having to deal with situations of that nature. But you mentioned about information, giving out false information. There was false information about Dr. King, that he was a communist. So information that we need to debunk information that's wrong, that's not factual, not true. And you had a challenge, speaking about trouble. That's one of the areas of your book. You said our challenge is to live so that no one will believe the rumors or the false information. And I love that. We should live that whatever may come or said or spoke about us, that it's not true. And I like you brought that out in your book. But there was one moment about your life that I found interesting, that you received a letter as a convicted felony. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I'm a native of New Orleans. I lived there over 20 years. So there was a point when I was in my late 20s. I lived in uptown New Orleans. There's a famous street called Magazine Street. And my mother lived about 10 minutes away from me, a 10-minute drive. So one day I went over to my mother's house to visit, and I still used to get mail over there. And she gave me a letter from the city of New Orleans, and I opened it up, and it said, Mr. Kennedy, just want to inform you that you have lost your right to vote because you've been convicted of a felony. And of course, that was surprising. That was disturbing news. And I got a little bit upset, and I started to go downtown to ask some questions, but I talked to one of my lawyer friends, and he said that would not be a good idea. So to make a long story short, 2 weeks after that first letter, I got a second letter from the city that said the original letter was a computer glitch. So what I thought about, if I had been driving as normal and I was stopped for some traffic reason, I mean, felony could be murder. I could have been on my way to the penitentiary having done nothing wrong. And it was actually kind of embarrassing, doctor, because I was a minister in St. Louis, and I volunteered to be part of the just another situation. I volunteered to be part of the prison ministry. And in order to go into this prison, you had to get a national background check done, right? And this record, came up, and I had, of course, I had no knowledge about it. So then my pastor pulls me in the office. Kennedy, what's going on in your life? There's a felony on your record. And this was like, shocking and embarrassing. So like I said, I was innocent. I was not guilty, but according to the system, they had me listed as doing something I didn't do. But I think even when we're falsely accused, and I talk about being falsely accused in the book, even when you're falsely accused, your character eventually will stand the test of the trial.
Wow, I love that, man. Thank you for sharing that. I love, as you addressed it. Imagine a computer glitch could have destroyed your life if there was no follow through and correcting that and clearing that. And thank God, that's all good. That was all wrong. Nothing, and no truth to that at all. I appreciate sharing that. But again, we are in this world. You also address a little bit about even the COVID-19 in your book. And you said here, the foundations of our world have been shaken because of COVID-19. And we all need support. We must be gentle with ourselves. Don't be afraid to ask for support. Don't solve a temporary solution with a final solution. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. That's another area that you mentioned that. But the reason why I mentioned that you mentioned the COVID-19 in the book, how that in this time, you mentioned about job loss, people not having jobs, being impacted. So I look at even in this COVID-19, this is an opportunity for people to do something they may have never done in spite of what's happened in our communities and surrounded with this world crisis. But back to the COVID-19 of the loss, and the grief. You shared a very personal story about the loss of a friend. And when I read that, that was very touching because, you know, you still have a photograph of him on your desk of the relationship you all had. So talking about loss, let's talk about loss a little bit and grief. Could you address that?
Like I referenced earlier, at some point, once I got married, my wife and I joined a church in St. Louis, Missouri. Great church, dynamic church. I was serving under my spiritual father, Dr. Ronald Bobo, Westside Baptist Church in St. Louis. And he let me know that he was planning to retire in 2019 after 32 years of service. So I'm one of his sons in the ministry. He ordained me, and, you know, he definitely wanted me to be there. So I made the trip to St. Louis, and there was another brother who was in the ministry there in St. Louis. His name was Demetrius. And Demetrius and I have been knowing each other for a while, but we didn't talk very frequently. So that last weekend, they gave a banquet for my pastor. I saw Demetrius and his wife there, and they look great. You know, I love to see African-American couples that have healthy marriages. They look great. And I was complimenting them on how great they look together. And I took a picture with Demetrius and his wife and all that kind of stuff. So that was on a Friday night. And on Sunday, we had the last service for the pastor. So when they served communion, I was standing next to Demetrius during that last communion Sunday for my pastor. So then a couple of weeks later, after I had gotten back to North Carolina, I got a call early in the morning, and someone told me that Demetrius had been murdered. And this phone call came about maybe 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning. And you know, I wasn't fully awake. So then I was talking to the person. It's like, okay, this cannot be correct information because I just saw this brother a couple of weeks ago. So to make a long story short, he and his wife and two other couples went out to dinner one night. And then after dinner, they went to a bowling alley. And there were some younger guys that were fussing and fighting about something in the bowling alley. The police were called. And then people started to leave the bowling alley, and Demetrius and his wife went to the car. And then I guess there was some commotion in the parking lot. Now get this, doctor. Okay, so initially, Demetrius' wife was sitting in the driver's seat. And when Demetrius heard the commotion, he said, let's switch seats. So then Demetrius got in the driver's seat, and shortly after that, someone came up to his window and shot him in cold blood. So you know, and so when I heard the story, you know, because he was about 45 years old at that time, he had been married 20 years and had two beautiful children and all that kind of stuff. It was so senseless. I didn't understand, why did they target him? So when we talk about Black men that are faithful to their wives, that are good providers and family men, Demetrius was all of that. Demetrius was a man that would not hurt anybody. He would give if you were in need. And it just seemed so senseless and so tragic that his life would end that way.
Oh man, thank you for sharing that. A senseless death, a man, as you said, provider, did everything well for his family, and a senseless death. But look at that move he made, switching the seat. That could have been his wife.
Yes, yes.
He sacrificed his life by sitting in that seat, moving, and his life was laid down, loving and caring for his wife in this tragic situation. It just, oh, how many ways. Again, thank you for sharing that. I think it's important as African-American men and as males, we can identify with loss and how we handle it, how we process it. Makes me think of the story in the book of David. When David went, the men went out and they came back to Ziklag. And when they came back and saw the family, their family's gone and all their houses, everything was destroyed. And it said, the Bible says those men cried till they couldn't cry no more. Men that's listening to this conversation today, we experience loss. We experience connections, friendships, as Dr. Kennedy did with a close brother, close friend, and the pain that we feel, the emotion that we feel, it's a normal reaction that we can express, we can navigate through those moments of our lives. So thank you, doctor, for sharing that. Dr. King spoke, and as we say often here, tomorrow is not promised. He also said that that procrastination is the thief of time. He spoke about the urgency of now. Now is the time for us Black men, sons. I heard a gospel artist, Jonathan McReynolds. I listened to one of our conversations I had with him years ago. He graduated from Columbia, and he said to young Black men, he said, let's finish education. I think it's important that we start something in our lives as young men and fathers, husbands, pastors, preachers, and we finish it. I mean, I'm 60 years old, doctor. I went back to college or school at the age of 49.
Wow.
I had no college degree, none. I had a military career, but I had no college degree. And you know what? It was in our church service one day, and people sometimes feel like the announcements are not important in the church. Let me throw this plug in for announcements in the church. It was the church secretary. She was reading the announcements for that service that Sunday morning, and she read that one of the young ladies in the congregation was getting her bachelor's degree, and she got it online. Man, I sat there and the Spirit convicted me. It literally convicted me and said, if that young woman can get a degree online, you can. I promise you. I went back to school in 2011, and I went 9 years. I didn't stop. I kept going from my associates to my bachelor's to my master's. Then I pursued the doctorate and ended. But going back to your book, you said now about the urgency of now. Now is the time to go back to college. You said now is the time to start that business. Now is the time to lose weight. And you said now is the time to forgive a friend. Man, now is the time. Speak about that. Now is the time.
Well, that blessed me, the education story you just shared, because one of my heroes that I referred to earlier, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, he grew up driving a garbage truck and working in the coal mines, and he did not go to high school until he was 20. And he did 4 years of high school education in 2 years. So by the time he was 37, he had his PhD. So he had, in that short period of time, from 20 to 37, high school diploma, 2 bachelor's, master's, and a PhD, the second Black man in history to get a PhD from Harvard University, the only man in American history to get a PhD whose parents were slaves. And like you said, that thirst for education, and it's never, what Dr. Woodson said, it's never too late to learn. So sometimes we get older, and I know this happens in my life. You know, I figure, you know, I'm over 50 years old, and there's certain things that I should know. But I think sometimes that shame and that pride can really block us from where God is trying to take us.
Thank you for that. Yes, we are never too old to learn, and knowledge is power, you know, and not trying to be braggadocious or make a name for yourself or worry about how many letters behind your name, but it's just something good, as you mentioned earlier, about it's an impressive thing for an African-American male who was well educated. So my brothers that are out there that's doing your thing, going to school, getting your education, pursuing your career goals, I salute you. Dr. Kennedy and I both salute you. So I'm gonna say this now, doctor. I found my diagnosis. You diagnosed me when I read your book. You didn't know that, but I'm gonna tell you. When we began talking about knowledge, You said so. You were a bibliophile. I'm sorry, a bibliophile.
Right. Let's get it
Talk
straight. So
about
now,
that.
yeah.
Help.
Okay. Now, some people, when I use that word, they start thinking about pedophile, not pedophile,
Right.
bibliophile.
Bibliophile.
A
Yes.
bibliophile is a lover and a collector of books.
Woo.
So, I mean, I have this conversation with my wife sometimes. She's been very kind to me over the years because I just, I have a large library. Actually, a friend of mine came to my house some years ago and helped me put up some shelves in my garage. So I have like 18 shelves of books in my garage, and
Wow.
in my personal office up here, I have like 4 bookshelves up here, and I have books in the overflow. So I keep on saying, at some point, I'm going to have to deal with my book issue. I got a storage space. I got books in there. And so there's been times when I've said, listen, I just need to throw these away or give these away. But it's a little difficult because I'm always reading something. So I like to say the books are my vice and my virtue. But I've always believed that all this reading is going to make me a great man one day. So, there could be far worse hobbies in the world. So that is my vice, I guess.
Oh man, I love it because I saw myself when I read that. But I love about, as you said, figure out somehow how to do with all these books. I have bookshelves of books. I love reading. Not only do I love reading, I'll read digitally on my Kindle. I never forget, I was at a restaurant one day, and you know what? I'm gonna get into mentoring a little bit later because this conversation is just awesome. I'm loving it. But I was in the restaurant, minding my own business. You never know, doctor, who's watching you, correct? I'm sitting there eating at a restaurant. It was breakfast in my area. This gentleman who worked I work at the Air Force Base in Ohio, right past the Air Force Base. So he walked over to my table. I didn't know him, but I saw him I would see him there out there at the base. I don't even know his name. I'm sorry, I don't know his name. He walked over to me. You know what he said to me? He said, every time I see you, you're always reading. Every time I see you, you're always reading. If I go to a restaurant by myself, hey, that's my date, me and my book. I'll pull my Kindle out, I'll read while I'm waiting, eating. I go to the barber shop, I read a book. Anytime I travel, I'm always reading. So, because the reason why I said that, because you said reading can transport you out of your environment. Now, I love that. Speak to that.
Yeah, because growing up in New Orleans and living in St. Louis, and sometimes our young people that are living in these urban environments, and sometimes there's a lot of crime and craziness going on. And when I used to grow up in New Orleans, it was a little bit annoying to me because when I would come home, I would see these young Black men always standing on the street corner. And the thing is, I guess they thought that was their corner, but the corner actually belongs to the city. So you might think that this is your turf, but when the police feels like rolling up on you, you're going to figure out that you don't own that territory.
Wow.
And, so if we spent more time reading and feeding our mind, you can tap into the experience of those that have lived before you, those people that are alive now, those people that have done things that you would like to do. So when you're a reader, it just kind of opens your mind up. It will increase your realm of possibility for yourself. So it's like taking a vacation without going anywhere. And you can access all this experience and hopefully learn from the mistake of other people that you've never met before. So, and you know what I've said in the sermon, Doc, another thing I said, if we used our library cards as much as our credit cards, we would be such a much better people.
Man, if we would use our library card
Yes, sir.
Shut that down right there, like we use our credit card. Now
Yes.
the time, early in this 2022 year, brothers, instead of using that credit card, buying that new suit, whatever, them new shoes, go to get you a library card and read a book. Come on, somebody. I love that. That was awesome.
Yes, sir.
I don't want to take all of your time. I've got just a few more areas because I am enjoying this conversation, Doctor. You talked about mentoring. And I think mentoring, again, go back to your book, The Wisdom from My Father's Porch. I think you made dedication of the book that your inspiration was from your father, your colleagues, your Black male friends, and raising your own son. So mentoring, I love the 4 qualities and characteristics that you share. You mentioned being true in willingness or desire to mentor, availability, security, and transparency. I love that about mentorship. Any one of those or any area about that you want to address?
Yeah, I think in our community, we need to do a lot better job. I think we talk a lot about mentoring, but in terms of doing it on a practical level, we have to be a lot more intentional about that. Because, we're always talking about, like, on a King Day, for example, where the next generation of leaders and all those kind of things. So I think those of us who are older, we have to be intentional about keeping our eye out for people that are younger than us that seem to have some kind of potential, so we have to make ourselves available. And then also I found in my life, the mentor has to be secure. Because there are some folks that are supposed to be mentoring us, and then jealousy comes out, competition comes out.
Come on.
So especially when I get to a certain age, I should be secure enough in my achievements and what I am and who I am, that I don't have to be competing with the person I'm supposed to be mentoring. We don't want to play all out the Saul and David dynamic in our life.
Come on,
Where
preacher.
the older guy is competing against the younger guy and concerned that the younger man is going to take his place. So the mentor has to be secure, but then also the mentee has to be teachable, because they're young people. They're always talking about, I need a mentor and things like that, but they're not always teachable. So it goes both sides.
Oh man, the mentee got to be teachable.
Amen.
You ask for the mentor, but you got to be ready to accept and hear what that mentor speaks to you. The transparency at level of that, see you where you are. You mentioned about there's a certain age of life that we all see ourselves that we want to be in a better place. I think I may have read in your book about preparing for life. Here, I'm 60 years old. I'm telling you, where I'm looking for a doctor? I'm looking for retirement. And retirement for me, I'm getting things in place in my life so I can do that comfortably. I've been married. My wife and I'm the husband of one wife. We've been married for 41 years.
Wow.
Next, the 26th of January will be our 42nd year of marriage. We have 7 adult children. I have 2 boys and 5 daughters. And just, as a father and a husband, we want to make sure that we've done our due diligence, providing things in our lives. I have 21 grandchildren. If you talk about the next generation, those that are coming behind us, we want to be in a place that we are laying the right things, setting the right example, doing the right things for God, for our lives and our future. And as I'm about to bring this to a close here, I want to talk about a very close subject for me. And I appreciate you mentioning in your book, because it's a stigma in the African-American community. We talk about not being able to express ourselves as Black men, shame, given a persona, we're strong and we don't go through anything and don't have any problems or situation in our lives. But you talked about suicide in this book. Thank you for making that something at the conversation to have, because this month, 49 years ago, I was 11 years old. I walked home from school and I came to my home, couldn't get in the house. When my sister came behind me to get in our home, my mother was she was in the house. My parents' bedroom was on the first floor of our house. My mom was in the bed. That was her first attempt to suicide. Doctor, 35 days later, February 19th, 1973, my mother took a firearm and took her life. She shot herself in the side and the temple. My life was changed forever. So thank you for talking about suicide. You said suicide is on the rise in the Black community. Men often do not share their innermost feelings. Unresolved grief and anger can cause many problems. These issues can affect men from all walks of life. Can you address that, doctor?
Yes, now I'm so glad that we're talking about this, that you brought it to light, because there are even some pastors. I think I was reading a story about a pastor, can't remember exactly where it was, some years ago. I believe the church had 2 Sunday morning services. So he preached, like, let's say the 8 o'clock service, and then maybe there was Sunday school, and then there was going to be 11 o'clock service. And, you know, the service was going, and then everybody's like, well, where's the pastor at? And I think between services, he had gone home and taken his life. And, you know, his wife and congregation are waiting for him at the church. Where's the pastor at? Yeah. And I think sometimes, especially as men, you know, sometimes men have things going on that, sad to say, that they might not even be comfortable sharing some things with their wife or the woman, the girlfriend in their life. And men, especially Black men, they're trying to handle all this weight by themselves. And sometimes it just becomes too much. So I just think it's very important that, you know, as Jesus had an inner circle, you know, Peter, James, and John, men need to have an inner circle. And then, you know, if that inner circle is not enough and there's something more deep rooted going on, there's no shame with seeking out a therapist or a counselor to process and to walk through those things. Because, you know, there's unresolved anger and grief. There's depression. There might be undiagnosed of depression that's going on. So we have to be man enough to admit when we're not okay, when we're not doing well, so that we can be around for our children, our families, and our communities.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Kennedy. I love that. I'm glad you brought in the factor of pastors. We're in this pandemic, and I observe social media, listen to what pastors say, and some of them really are struggling with this pandemic. And when I say some of them, it's a challenge for all of us. But I penned a book, The Resilience and Success of African American Pastors. And for me, that book is now speaking to my life. Now it's for, if I'm going to write about resilience, going through trying times. Oh, thank you, doctor. And I see the book there.
Yes, sir.
You and talk about trying times, challenging times. So I'm living that. Now I'm walking that out, because we know that this is a temporary moment. We're going to get through this. It's not permanent, but we have to keep the resolve and have the tenacity to keep moving and keep pressing, and then finding ourselves, as you said, in safe conversations with men that we can trust, who can encourage us. So I love that part of it. Thank you for sharing that. And what a good way to close about our health. I say I'm 60 years old, and I love cycling. People know me. I get out and cycle. And I got this saying, cycling does the body good. So I went to the doctor this year when every time I turn my birthday, I go out and get a physical. You know, I got to the doctor and did all my examination, my blood. And the doctor said, he asked me, I was doing a colonoscopy. I think it's important, men do colonoscopy at certain ages of your life. And while I was there waiting for that process to take place, he took my monitor my blood pressure and all. He said, you have a very low heart rate. He said, do you jog? I said, I cycle. He said, that's why you have that low heart rate, because of your cycling, your exercise. But you spoke about taking care of your health. Go see a doctor, because going to see a doctor, it can determine things such as blood pressure, cholesterol, glucose level, prostate cancer, sickle cell anemia. So you said it's very important for us as Black men to visit our primary care doctor. And you mentioned the dentist too. Come on, somebody.
Yes, yes,
That's
yes,
definitely
yes.
important. Go to the dentist, my brothers, and the ophthalmologist. And you said, don't forget your mental health. Because, man, when I went to the doctor last year on my 60th birthday, and I went there and he gave my physical report, he said, for you to be an African-American male, you don't have any blood pressure, no cholesterol, no pre-diabetes, no diabetes. He said, you are in good health. Man, I was thankful. No goodness of my own, but the word of God said, that I would prosper and be in health.
Yes.
Your soul prospers. So mentally, physically, spiritually, we should be in good health. But you said also, don't forget our mental health. Dr. Kennedy, I want you to have the last words and last say address about health for brothers, for Black men.
Yes, it's so important for us to look after our physical and our mental health, to get those annual checkups. I actually am scheduled to go in to see my doctor in the next couple of weeks. I've been postponing, putting it off actually, but I need to get that done. So, the primary care doctor and the ophthalmologist, the eye doctor, the dentist, we need to make sure that we check in to make sure that everything is as it should be. And if there's issues going on, it's always better to catch it early as opposed to when it advances and becomes more problematic. So it's very important that we do that. And I also was thinking, doctor, when we were talking about earlier, just about the amount of crime and violence in certain communities. I'm a social worker. So for example, I have a social work license. So here in North Carolina, every 2 years, I have to get my license renewed. I have to have 40 hours of continuing education credit and all that kind of thing. But I was thinking, people that own handguns and firearms, once they get that license to carry, there's nobody or there's no requirement for them to check in, So sometimes people go out and they do interesting things because maybe they went through a divorce, they lost their jobs and things like that. So obviously, if people had to check in, it's not going to stop all the crime and the killing that's going on. But if you check in on somebody and ask them for counseling, if you save one life, to me, it would be worth it. But it's very important that we check in. And even as we close, when we say Black Lives Matter, my joke to my friends, it's like Black lives can't matter if Black people don't check in with each other. So we have to check in with our family, with our friends, and then as Christians and believers, no matter what the race, ethnicity, skin color, we have to do a better job of checking in on folks, saying hello, how you doing? Not because I need something, but just because I was concerned and I wanted to see that all was well with you.
Oh, wow. See, that's another part of you, the social worker in you. Look at all these layers of information that's in you, doctor. And now I can see why you're a motivational speaker. You can talk to an audience. You can speak to where they are and leave an indelible impact in their lives. This has been an awesome time of conversation, a discussion. As two brothers here, I thank God for the relationship, the connection we made. You checked in on me as I was preparing to finish my doctoral degree. And I appreciate that. And there's a circle, a network of those who are in a community of completing their doctoral degrees. And you connected with me and followed up with me, and we have stayed in contact. And I think connections, being relational is so important. I appreciate that for you as my brother's friend. So tell those who may be listening to this where they can get your book and acquire your book, or even contact you if they need to.
Yes, you can acquire a copy of my book. I published with an African-American publisher named African American Images, African American Images. So if you go to their website, africanamerican.images.com, you can purchase my book there. It's called Wisdom from My Father's Porch. You can also purchase the book on Amazon, but I'm encouraging some of my friends to go through my publisher, support an African-American company, africanamerican.images.com. So Doc, I did send that link to you earlier, so maybe you can share that link as well.
I will.
Where you can directly purchase the book.
I will. And thank you, man. I appreciate that. You know, there's one thing you mentioned in your book. I love the fact you shared some information I didn't know until you shared it. Of course, I read it. We talking about Martin Luther King, and this is a day of active service that we do in our communities around the world. And I can appreciate the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King still lives. This day is not just about African Americans, it's about the whole world. Being the Black man who was the voice, who made something happen. He said he had a dream for Black men, white men, our children, lock hands together, walk together, Gentile and Jew, for freedom, for unity. He was about bringing people together, and we can salute him for that. So for my acts of service today, I got up, it's snowing up in Ohio, and my neighbor is a Caucasian elderly lady. We've been in our community for 20 years, but I got up out of my bed, I shoveled my driveway, and then I shoveled hers. A single woman, age, and I just wanted to show that was my act of service today, giving on this MLK Day. But you spoke about Rosa Parks. You said there was a young man that beat her up in her home, and you asked the question, was it worth it? That was powerful, man.
Yes, I believe that young man, his name was Joseph Skipper, and Miss Parks lived by herself in the city of Detroit. So she was in her late 80s, maybe even 90 years old. And when he broke into her house, she asked him, do you know who I am?
Wow. And
he said yes, and proceeded to rob her, beat her, or whatever. But once again, you know, we have to have that respect for our elders, because even if he was a criminal, once he realized who she was, he still could have decided to walk away, but he continued to do what he did. So it was really a sad story. So we really need to respect our elders and our history.
Respect our elders and our history. I love that. Dr. Kennedy, it's been a great conversation. I'll have to bring you back. We'll talk about that social work, because that's another part of you. I gotta say, as a pastoral counselor, we need licensed counselors like you. Because when you said people need to check in, they need to make sure they get checked in, and we connect them with the right people and the right source. As I always say, to the next time, be blessed. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me.